Are we recording?
Yes, sir.
Welcome, everyone, to the Rink Rat Report podcast. Happy to have on today goalie expert, one half of the Goalie Science Podcast, grad student, just Mr. Hockey all around, I would say, Mr. Goaltending, Ben Csiernik. How's it going today, Ben?
I'm doing excellent, fellas. Thank you so much for having me. How you guys doing?
I'm doing well, and I'm it's a pleasure to have you on because if people who listen to this podcast know that like goalies are always voodoo to me. I am the odd man out here. We have two goalies on, and we have one guy who isn't a goalie, and that's me. So I'm excited to learn a lot more about goaltending and just a little bit more about like the numbers behind it, because there's a ton of things that we can get into. So I'm not gonna bury the lead here. I'm gonna let Piz take it away with the first question, but super excited for this episode.
Awesome. And everyone knows there's a Leafs podcast. We got to talk about the most important team on planet Earth, the Toronto Maple Leafs. So let's get into there. Let's just start it off. Let's get into the Leafs goaltending situation for this upcoming season. Ben, I wanted to get your thoughts on, like, a general, where do you think, how confident are you in the Leafs goaltending situation coming up to this year?
I am actually so I'm not a Leafs fan. So anyway, this Leafs podcast, don't get mad at me. I'm the weirdest person on earth. A few years ago, I revoked fandom and said, I'm just going to watch hockey. I'm not going to care who wins. And let me tell you, it's a freeing experience. You don't get the same highs anymore, guys. But I now kind of just step back and just watch it all. So this is without any Leafs bias. I think the Leafs are in an awesome spot goaltending wise with the way they're shaped up currently. Samsonov about $3.5 million a year is an awesome contract for the Leafs. Again, a 1-year deal, but it's a good little deal. It's a great price for him. Again, we'll see. Is it Martin Jones backing them up to start? Is it Joseph Woll backing them up to start? But having both those guys at under $1 million each, and now we all know Murr's on LTIR. But as it currently stands, to have 3 NHL goalies at just a hair over $5 million. That's about as good as it gets in the NHL right now.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there's a little bit more I want to unpack here with the salary cap number, because again, like, people like to view goalies. Sometimes they don't view it in the lens of the salary cap like they do with players, and that's like a very important factor that you have to view within the lens of the contract, right? So there were 2 other contracts who were goalie contracts that filed for arbitration. One of them was Filip Gustavsson. He got 3 years at $375. Jeremy Swayman 1 year at $375, and we got Samsonov at 1 year and $3.5. And I know it's very hard to compare 3 different goalies, but like they all got a similar contract range. So can you talk about like how Samsonov compares to those 2 guys? Is he on a similar level? Do you think one guy is significantly better than the other? Do you think one guy made out as a bandit with this steal contract? Do you think the Bruins maybe got a steal on Swayman here? Just talk to me a little bit more about the context around the Samsonov deal, how he kind of plays, his structure, and like how he's similar or different to Gustavsson and Swayman.
Yeah, so again, it was just like Gustafsson or Grubauer. Which one am I hearing there?
Gustafsson. Phil Gustafsson.
Yeah. So yeah, this is going to be the big thing, right? So 3 very different goalies. I was going to say, I don't think Grubauer will be signed this year. Yeah. In both Samsonov and Gustafsson, you have 2 really interesting situations where both guys were coming from teams where they didn't really perform to, I think, either fans would have said, right? I'm not sure you're asking Senators fans and they're saying, oh, we loved having Gustafsson, right? I don't think anyone ever mentioned that to me before, but he was pretty much incredible in Minnesota, right? Like that was, I think enough people talked about it, but that was arguably a Vezina caliber run he had at the back end of that season in Minnesota. And so again, that's a really friendly deal for them if it can kind of continue, right? Like that's always gonna be the big asterisk. That's the same thing with Samsonov, right? This was his first year where I thought he was pretty good. I think he's a good fit in the Leafs system. I think you know exactly what you're going to get out of him, which is a goalie that plays pretty conservatively on first shot chances. It's a goalie who does not exceptionally move well laterally compared to his peers, especially at distance, but moves really well laterally in tight. So if people watch games and look at that little bit of a difference, you'll see that Samsonov in tight laterally, excellent. He shuts down stuff. He stays big, does a really good job that way. Move it out a little bit farther, and that's kind of where that's not the strongest part of his game. Comparing contracts across the board, I'm not sure what's going to happen in Boston with Swayman. I think he's a great goalie. I think Boston, if anyone watched them play enough, is like that's one heck of a defensive team, right? I would compare the way Samsonov plays a lot more to the other Boston goalie, which is Linus Ullmark, which are again a lot more stable direct shot goalies. who don't look exceptionally flashy laterally. I am a huge Gustafsson fan. I'm a little nervous. I hope he can bring that back. But I think, again, at 3.5, honestly, that's a great price. I think that's market value for what you get at Ilya Samsonov. And I think Leafs fans should be pretty happy with that number, honestly.
Yeah, that's true. Despite like the other two being pretty good value. But I like what you brought up about, Samsonov. You do see it a lot. I would say like he makes a lot of exceptional saves where he's making the butterfly slide across and he's still making himself big because he is a pretty big goaltender. Shoulders are still relatively high up and he's making those huge saves. I mean, ones that come to mind, there was a couple against Tampa. There was one against Detroit in just a garbage game there that he made a huge one, but I like that point there. Let's get into another Leafs goaltender to bounce around a little bit. Joseph Woll, when I messaged you before the podcast, you said you were a big Woll fan. Take us through your thoughts of what you think of Joseph Woll, your expectations for him this coming season and seasons past.
Yeah. So, I'm fine going on record on this one. I've said this for a long time that I think Joseph Woll, going back all the way to 2016, the Leafs getting them early in the third round is an awesome, awesome draft pick, right? Anytime you can get a goalie of this caliber in the third round, that's been exceptional. I always toss this one of my favorite fun facts. Either of you know who Joseph Woll's goalie partner was the year he was drafted out of the NTDP?
I do that.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, it's Jake Ottinger. So,
and he started over Ottinger in the World Juniors.
Yeah, like that. This is the Jake Ottinger's again established himself now as a pretty dominant goalie in the NHL. But Joseph Woll's been alongside. That's probably again one of the best goalie tandems in junior hockey, maybe pretty close to ever. As I'm currently thinking about it, if anyone has a better one, toss it my way. But I think it's great. I think the biggest issue with Joseph Woll is that he hasn't been given an opportunity. That's where I think the number one issue that we've seen with Joseph Woll is just not having a chance to be more in the NHL. Again, he's 25, right? And, we always say that goalies take longer to develop. We got to, let them figure it out how to play. And I think there's a piece of that. I think goalies need to get acclimated to the team they play on and in the environment and the leagues they play. I think that's totally fair. But I think we do a little bit of a disservice with our really talented goalies by not getting them just in the NHL earlier, right? Like you guys have seen how things have shaped up across the league, teams signing 3-4 NHL goalies on their rosters. And that just pushes guys like Woll down. So my fingers are crossed. I really hope we see Woll on that opening day NHL roster. Like I really do think that, yeah, and I think we will. I think Jones is kind of signed into that, like what they're calling that flex goalie position now, where like he'll probably play 10 games is the number I'd imagine. Like I think in a perfect Leafs world, they're probably looking at something around 45, 25, 12. Like that's kind of what that breakdown looks like overall. You get to that 82 number around that might be, and there's a little bit of give on either side, but you probably don't want your starter playing north of 55 games anymore in this NHL. So again, I think he's great. The things that people are watching Joseph Woll, one of the things that the reason he doesn't always step out or like seem flashy to people is because he's a positionally excellent goaltender. And he's a really, really, really good skater. So he gets from position to position really well. He's efficient that way. He's a way above average NHL caliber skater. And so when you combine those two things, those big flashy saves don't show up a lot, right? He's making a backdoor save controlled, right? He's not scrambling all over the place. He's identifying where he needs to go before he starts moving around. And if you look at someone like Samsonov, who's a little bit more scrambling on broken plays, I would say that's something like Leafs fans and Capitals fans probably saw a bunch of that. When he loses the puck, he gets happy feet. Woll is a bit more patient. He'll just sit in that butterfly and he'll just hunt for the puck, find it. And so when goalies move less, sometimes people get thrown off as if they're not trying or they're not, flashy. The comparison, I think, and this is a bit of a loose comparison, but the best example of a really good skater who you don't appreciate it is Sorokin in the Islanders. He's one of the best skaters in the league, but you watch him and he doesn't really show it off very much because he's just in the right spot a lot. I think that is the style that Woll plays, and I think with the way Toronto's team is shaping up, I think he could be actually just fantastic this year for them. So
I'm super happy to hear that. And like, before I get into this next question, I just have like a little mini question here for you. Do you have like a player comp for Joseph Woll that has been in a Leafs uniform before, because it feels like what you mentioned there. I kind of see the similar things. Again, not a goalie guy, but not a flashy guy, but is always very positionally sound. And I feel like we haven't had a goalie like that in recent years. If you just look back, we had Murray, who's again like that all over the place. Jack Campbell like that all over the place. Is it Frederik Andersen? But at times he also feel like he could lose his sword. So what's like a mini comp that's worn a Leafs uniform to Joseph Woll, just to give fans like a general idea of like what they could be expecting here?
My brain went to young Freddie as well. I think again the game's modernized, right?
Yeah.
So that's probably your best recent comp for people to think. Again, I don't think we can go back too far into the early 2000s to get another comp. I think we're going to run out of goaltending pretty fast. But I think that's it. And this is going to be, and I'm sorry if I step on any Leafs toes here, but I think Freddie Andersen was really good in Toronto, and I think gets a little bit of extra flack that he didn't deserve for his performance in Toronto. He was underappreciated. We'll call that.
That's fair. I think that's fair. It's just
those game sevens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But again, small sample. We're like the biggest preachers of small sample size, and like we stuck with it. And hey, we won a playoff series last year, right? So
exactly. You don't get to 2019 against the Bruins. You don't get to game 7 without Frederik Andersen. He was lights out, but then in game 7, he just gives up a muffin to start, and it's like, But that's then, as you mentioned, sports, like right? You can't go too far back with comparisons with goalies. And it's funny. I have no idea why I was doing this, but I was watching it was because I was trying to inspire myself because the Leafs were down 3-0 against the Panthers. And so I went back and I watched Philadelphia, Boston, and I'm watching Tuukka Rask in net. And so, Ben, you would know right now the recoil where it's both feet go back at the same time. I'm watching this guy's hips move like crazy, it seemed like. I was like, what the hell is he doing in net? Because he's doing seat cuts. So that's where you can't. That was 2010. That's not that long ago. So that's where you can't go too far back with goalies. It's kind of crazy.
No, and this is something that I think is, again, I like to put it out there as kind of a goalie guy this way, that goaltending kind of works in 5 to 7 year cycles where we have changed and modernized the game to varying degrees, big changes every 5 to 7 years. We're now kind of in a period since about 2015, 16 where we haven't had a ton of change. We've kind of reached a relative stability point. There hasn't been any major league changes, which typically does influence stuff as well, right? I mean, the league's changed goalie equipment sizes a million times at this point now, right? So we haven't had one of those in a little bit, so the goalies haven't had to adjust too much. But yeah, historical comps are really hard. And I think they are becoming hard even a little bit for players as well to make those comps as the game's just changed so much. But yeah, goaltending, I think honestly, when I look around the league, and again, this is my bold take, I think the most similar playing style that if you go watch a bunch of footage is Sorokin in New York. I think they complement each other size-wise, positional, and movement-wise. It's a good comparison. Sorokin has been I think that's a steal at 8.25, and that's a lot of money for a goalie, and I think that's a steal. So early comps for sure, but playing style very similar characteristic-wise, right? Good skaters, compositional goalies. And again, hopefully we see 25 games for Woll this year, and everyone can appreciate those good things that he does.
College football fans, are you ready for week 1? DraftKings Sportsbook is hooking you up with a can't-miss offer to start the season strong. This week, new customers can bet just $5 on college football and score $200 in bonus bets instantly. Anything can happen in college football. Your team could go from unranked to dynasty mode in just a couple of years. Change comes fast. The only thing that's a lock is the great offers from DraftKings Sportsbook. Life's more fun when you're in on the action. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code THPN. New customers can score $200 in bonus bets instantly when they bet just $5 on college football. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code THPN. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777. or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, KS, 21 plus, age varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. See dkng.co/football for eligibility, terms, and responsible gaming resources. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply.
Yeah, you touched a bit on this before. I was going to ask you a bit about Martin Jones, but you kind of already touched on it. So I'm going to kind of gel these next two questions together. Just tell us a little bit more about Martin Jones as a goalie, because you had a thread posted about it that was really enjoyable. Again, if you're listening to this on audio or if you're on video, you can see Ben's Twitter handle right there. It's BCSIERNIK. For those listening on audio, go check out Ben on his Twitter feed, and you can find that great thread on Martin Jones. But let's give us like a quick TLDR on Martin Jones. And then on top of that, you also touched on this earlier. You had a great article about load management on your Substack, I believe it is. It's Medium in your bio. I forget what exactly it's called. But so with the Leafs potentially going 3 goalies and a lot of teams kind of shifting towards that 3 goalie structure, what are the days of the alpha goaltender playing 60 plus games behind us? And like, tell us more about load management, what you found from researching it. So Martin Jones first, and then quickly load management.
Yeah, really simple. Martin Jones is, again, kind of the exact like flex goalie position that a lot of teams are going for, where it's a goalie, you know exactly what you're going to get out of Martin Jones. And what you're going to get out of Martin Jones, again, is a simple positional goalie, makes a lot of first saves, doesn't make a ton of flashy stuff, right? He's the guy who you put a net and the team in front of him knows where he's going to succeed and knows what he's not going to do. And I think for again, younger teams or, again, more offensively inclined teams, now the Leafs have been pretty good defensively the past few years. So as much as some Leafs fans don't want to hear that, it has been a good defensive team. Jones provides some stability because, again, you just don't have that variability. I think he's now, again, later in his career, I think you're probably not expecting him to I don't think the Leafs are expecting him to play 30 games this year. I think we're much more expecting Jones to kind of be up and down and sort of, again, coming in for those games where you have, those 4 and 8s or those 4 and 7s where the weird NHL schedule happens sometimes. And you just want to, again, get a guy in there who can provide a really stable game. I think when we'll see Jones in net this year, I think I kind of get flashbacks to that first playoff game where Woll was in net, where that team just collapsed in front of the net. I think you'll see teams in front of him collapse a lot more towards the net. Jones is pretty consistent. Again, straight line shots, all that kind of stuff. He's not going to make the big backdoor save anymore. It's also never really been his game anyway, right? So don't expect those huge dynamic saves, but consistent. And sorry, yeah.
No, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just gonna tie that in kind of right into the load management piece. So we hear it all the time, NBA inspired for sure, right? And so there is, I mean, and for Toronto people, right? Like, I think the first thing really came on, we always talk about Kawhi Leonard, right? So that's everyone always hears load management. Now, Kawhi's got a full sports management team that has like 8 professionals that decide whether he's playing or not. So that's a pretty intense system that they use over there, and they're doing a ton of metrics on it. None of that has been like super published in a public space to demonstrate that it really does anything, but it's kind of fun. So there's that. When we look at load management, look at the leading researchers on like load management, they call it, again, just trading load monitoring. So it's a little less flashy. But what we basically see, what all the researchers come down to when we boil it down, is that you can't get hurt if you don't play.
Fair. Like,
right? Like, you boil it down, we talk about sleep, nutrition, recovery, all those things that NHL teams have, and that the resources are available. But at the end of the day, I did a little thread earlier on a few weeks ago about goalie injuries. And there's been a big thing about goalies getting hurt more. Goalie injuries have been pretty stable over time, which I think is interesting. Those trends haven't really changed very much. I think what we're seeing a lot more now is goalies, when they do get injured, are just taking more time to recover. You have those flex goalie positions. Teams aren't rushing to get that true number 1 back in the net, because they have, a second, a third, maybe even a 4th goalie who can provide NHL level goaltending, right? Or at least, suitable NHL level goaltending. So
unless you're the Toronto Maple Leafs over the last 2 years, right? Like, frick, seemed like Campbell, we had Mrazek, he got injured. Then Campbell came in, he played well. He got injured. Mrazek came back. Mrazek played like crap. And then he got injured. And we had Eric Shalgren, and then Mrazek got hurt again. Like, that was just one season. And then that didn't even touch on Matt Murray too. So
yeah, and so the Leafs have had some goaltending injury issues, to say the least, over the past few years. But I think, again, what we're going to see is, and you look at something like the Leafs this year, right? Like, as of right now, and what I think everyone's going to say is that Ilya Samsonov is the guy for them, right? In the playoffs, they're going to want to have, when the Leafs make the playoffs next year, because they're going to make the playoffs next year because they're a good team, they're probably going to want Ilya Samsonov as their starting goalie, right? The best thing that they can have is that make sure that he's healthy throughout the entire year, right? I think, like I said this earlier this year when again, Samsonov got hurt and Woll came into the playoffs for the Leafs. I said, like, the biggest disservice was that Woll didn't get 15 or 20 games in the year, right? Like, that was, had he had that amount of games, you know, like I think we see I'm not sure we see a super different thing. That series was kind of a tough spot.
Yeah, of course.
But again, I think there's a level of goalie environment, like acclimatization. Goalies need to get familiar with the team around them and vice versa defensively. Like, structures should change as your goalie's in net, right? So I think we'll see that to counterbalance. Again, you don't want Samsonov hurt, so let's play him less, right? If he does tweak something, okay, give him a full 2-3 weeks off instead of, getting him back in 4 or 5 days. You just have a bigger buffer to ensure that guys are coming back healthier when they do have those minor tweaks. And I think that's what I think the applied version of load management is, right? Like, when a goalie does tweak something, when those hips are achy, and you talk to any goalie, that happens during a season, right? They're going to complain of hip stuff or knee stuff during that year. When that happens, you can pull them back a little bit because you have Joseph Woll, you have Martin Jones. That can be, 2 games in 2 weeks for Samsonov instead of getting him in 4, right? There's just that flexibility so that he is not building on stuff that's tweaking and aching. You can just kind of pull that back. And like I said, at the end of the day, if he's not in the net in a game, he's sitting in a press box or sitting on the bench, he's not going to pull his groin. He's not going to tear his ACL.
Yeah.
Actually, I got a counter to that. Jose Theodore, I believe years ago when he got traded from Montreal to Colorado that year, I think he got injured literally slipping on his porch. So you're very likely to not get injured if you're not playing.
Yeah, we can try to minimize it as much as possible, right?
Yeah, exactly. Bubble wrap them.
I'm so happy you brought up the Joseph Woll and playing 10 games because that makes me feel super vindicated, because I think on this podcast, we talked a lot about, like, listen, trade deadline, Matt Murray, he's like, we've seen him enough. Let's just stick him, not let him play. And, like, let's see Joseph Woll ride. And I think that was one of the most frustrating things as a viewer of the Leafs last year, not seeing this guy play as many games as he should have, and then ending up going to him in the playoffs. So I know you kind of predicted a number for how many games Samsonov, Woll, and Jones will play in the season, but what scenario do you see where Joseph Woll can jump Samsonov this year? Do you think that's even possible, or do you think he'd have to literally, is it only him going nuclear and being literally Vezina caliber for him to jump Samsonov, or is there just no way, just based on contract allocation, things like that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest things to kind of get into the mind of an organization, right? Like, the biggest thing I think for a lot of coaches working in hockey now, coaches have someone that they just have a feeling for sometimes. And that, can be frustrating as fans, can be frustrating as just, as you're part of the team, right? Coaches rely a lot on intuition, right? How they're feeling about it, how they think their team plays in front of a goalie, how they like the structure in front of that goalie, or, the stability that goalie provides within their own structure. Now, teams are obviously and again, the Leafs are an extremely data-driven team. They have a very, very, very impressive research and analytics department. So they are doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes or openly, depending on kind of who you see. So there is a lot of information coming in that organization that they're doing a lot of stuff. I think there's a chance that he could be a starting goalie. I do really think he has the potential to be an NHL caliber starting goalie, and a pretty good one. Like I said, I am a huge Joseph Woll believer, and I really like the way he plays. Like, the way that he plays in it, again, calm skater and a sound positional goalie. Those are the two big things that, when I'm watching goalies, that's the things I look for. Right, because I think that translates well to just consistency. And at the end of the day, with sport filled with so much variance, you want the most consistent option, right? Because you're going to get pucks off a shin pad off a player in the net, and so you can't control that, right? I think, again, like I said, I kind of said I would expect around 20. I think that'd be a really good number, 20-25 for Woll to play if he's in that backup role. I honestly, like I said, I don't know. I think from everything I hear, that's the plan, is to have, again, Jones in the flex, but. I would love to see Woll get 30 or 40 this year, right? I would have loved to see him get 30 or 40 last year. I do think he was kind of ready for that. I think he's paid his dues a little bit. And again, he hasn't played a ton of games in the AHL. Again, early career marred by a lot of those pandemic-related season issues.
He also had a shoulder injury. He had a big shoulder injury. For a while.
Right. So again, he only played between the Leafs and the Marlies last year. If you just take regular season games, he only played 28 games last year, right? Which is the most he's played in a professional season minus his first one in the AHL back in 2019, 2020, right? So he has not played a lot, which I think is probably why you haven't seen him being pushed more. People are probably just feeling like, he hasn't earned that, right? But again, I think he's ready for it. I think you kind of got to throw goalies into the deep end a little bit. Otherwise, you just end up having them sit around for forever. I tell the story, again, this is a little bit sidetracked, but like a really good example of not promoting your young guys is the LA Kings drafted Matt Villalta a few years ago. He probably never played an NHL game, so a lot of people may have never heard of him, right? Played in Sault Ste. Marie, undrafted OHL goalie, and then got drafted in the NHL, ended up being undrafted. So little fun prospect pipeline. But he just signed with Arizona after playing 0 pro games in LA's system. He's played in Ontario in the AHL for the last 3 years, right? He's 24. Right? Like, it's like, hey, you just lost your draft pick to Arizona, right? Because you didn't give him a chance. And LA's goaltending last year,
best.
Not great.
Not great.
You had to go out and get Korpisalo. And on top of that, look at their goalies. I was thinking about it. I don't know why. For this season, it's David Riddick, who I believe you said had the easiest workload ever last year and only put up like a 900. And they have Cam Talbot, who they're hoping and praying comes back to some sort of form. And then they have Phoenix Copley as well, who was a teammate of Jamie Phillips, your buddy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And now they lose a goalie out of their system, right? It's stuff like this, right? So it's those situations. And again, I'm hoping that now Woll should be in the NHL and that doesn't happen again. But that's the things that I think, right? Where it's like, these kids have good numbers, these pros have good numbers at 20, age 22, age 23, they're playing well. You got to find some games for them, right? And it's tough because at the end of the day, you got to win games in the NHL. Every game matters in that regular season for the most part. But again, if the goal is to find cheap, good goaltending, which that's what the goal should be. That is the the money ball, money puck of hockey right now is good, cheap goaltending. And at $700 some odd $1,000, that is Joseph Woll. So
yeah, and it also it leads up to what you're saying. Like, it lines up perfectly. What will Calgary do this season with Dustin Wolf? I mean, they have Markstrom on the books for a bunch of money. They have
Vladar.
The big
Dan
Vladar as well for $2 million or something like that. And then you have Dustin Wolf, who's been dominant at every level, and he's on an NHL contract. What do you do with him? So you better get him in the net soon, I think.
Yeah, and that's going to be a really interesting situation in Calgary too, right? Like, again, if anyone's listening to this, Dustin Woll, Dustin Wolf, you go back and look at his statistics. That guy I don't think he's ever had a bad season. I think he's had only good season since he was 16. Like, I have never seen a goaltending run like this. But like you said, Calgary, and to be fair, again, and I've written about this as well, but Calgary's defensive structure crumbled a little bit last year. There was something like, I was running some numbers, and it was something like a 25 or 30% uptake in offensive chances against in Calgary for like this past season from the one before. So Markstrom was not super great. Vladar was fine. They didn't have their best seasons. I'm not sure either of them would say that they had their best seasons, but Calgary also gave up a decent amount of chances. So
even if you're not going on vacation, summer's all about a vacation state of mind. Whether I want to listen to Taylor Swift on repeat or just need to retreat inside my own head for a bit, I love crafting my own summer soundtrack by popping in my Raycon wireless earbuds. There's so much going on all summer. Sometimes you need some upbeat music to pump you up before you see people, or stay calm with some guided meditation. Personally, I love blasting Taylor Swift on my way home from the gym, like Richie and the Bear. Let me tell you right now, Raycons are the best way to listen. Use earbud tap functions to toggle between 3 customizable sound profiles, noise isolation, and awareness mode. Raycons have a 32-hour battery life, including 8 hours of playtime, so you can listen to what you want when you want for a really long time. They come with custom gel tips for the most comfortable in-ear fit. They start at half the price of other premium audio brands, but they sound just as good. And Raycons come with a 30-day happiness guarantee, so you really can't lose. Create your own soundtrack with Raycon. Right now, Rink Rat Report listeners can get 15% off their Raycon order at buyraycon.com/THPN. That's buyraycon.com/THPN to save 15% off on Raycons. buyraycon.com/THPN. Yeah.
So I
didn't watch too much Calgary, but also you'll know about this as well in terms of feel and how the goalies felt in net. A lot of Flames fans were saying like they would get 20 shots in a row. The shots would be 20-2, and then you'd give up a breakaway and it's in the back of the net. It's like, damn.
Yeah.
Like, can't you give me a couple from the blue line first? So that feel kind of is a little bit awkward there as well. Sorry, Jason, to cut you off there.
So no, I was just gonna ask because you dropped like a little nugget there that I kind of want to unpack. You talked about like, was it Calgary's defensive structure and how it kind of fell back last year compared to 2 years ago?
Yeah.
So what's your kind of like process behind figuring that kind of stuff out? And this kind of ties into this question where when you're building a team, right? Like when you're like let's wear our GM hats right now. When we're building a team, do you think that you need a goalie of multiple goalies of a similar style for the team to kind of go off of how the team in front of him plays? Does that kind of make sense? I know that question's a little bit odd, but like how much, I guess the question I'm trying to ask is how much does a team in front of the goalie drive what you need in your goaltender from a GM perspective?
So this is the $1 million idea. So I'll tell everyone that I'm available for hire. This is my idea. No one else can implement it. I think one of the next biggest change, or one of the bigger changes that we're going to see in team development over the next few years, are teams stacking 3-4 goalies by playing style. Like based on, again, now there's a lot of volatility in coaching and systems, and they're always changing. But yeah, there is a type of goaltending that fits a system, right? I don't think coaches are going to change their system around a goalie, but there are definitely goalies who are going to succeed and fit in a system. And there's going to be some who do it better than others, right? I think it's a great question. Like, I think you should realistically, try and have goalies who play similarly, because otherwise you're having these crazy swings. Like a really good example, and you brought up before, is like David Rittich versus Connor Hellebuck in Winnipeg. Very different goalies. Very, very different goalies. Anyone who's watched enough David Rittich knows that he is an ultra flexible, wide, slidey goalie. Connor Hellebuck is the complete opposite of that, right? Again, a positionally sound guy who doesn't slide around and get a position much at all. Also, not super flexible, right? Very different goaltending styles. And that's probably why, a part of why Rittich might have, again, not have done that well in a system that was seemingly pretty good in a quiet team, right? Because again, maybe now, the team is so used to playing in front of Connor Hellebuck that you have a real big difference of playing styles between those two goalies. I think, like I said, I wrote this up on Twitter before and talked about it, but I think Martin Jones does complement the way that Samsonov plays. I think that, Leafs fans, if you watch both of them play, they're not the same by any means. I guess I do think Samsonov is a clear number one there and is a good NHL goalie. But I think you'll see more of a similar style that way into the type of saves they make and the type of style they do. So are teams heading that way? I don't really think so, because I think a lot of teams are just like, goalies and move on, right? But I think, again, if you build out a team, if you have a dedicated system, I think that's where you find value in goaltending, right? I think that's where the money is and the fit is, right? And if you spend less money on goaltending, you can spend more money on players, makes your system better, and now you can find cheaper goaltending that fits that system, and the cycle kind of just begets itself, right? Yeah. So I'm sorry for all the goalie union. I'm sorry for the goalie union who's mad at me that I'm fighting against contracts right now. Pay them less.
I'm fully on board with this. Like, this is like you and I are very.
My question actually to Jason now is that kind of like in the NFL, because Jason's a big football guy. Is that like the backup quarterback question? Do you have the two same guys or?
Yeah, like kind of, because like it depends on the team, but a lot of coaches will say like they don't like to put together different playbooks for different quarterbacks. Like you look at the San Francisco 49ers, right? It looks like Sam Darnold's, I'm sorry, this is going to go off on a little tangent, but it looks like Sam Darnold's probably going to beat out Trey Lance for that backup role. And it's probably because Sam Darnold is very similar to Brock Purdy, than Trey Lance is to Brock Purdy. And then same thing with the Ravens. The Ravens very like RG3, Caleb Huntley. They have that same style of guy to Lamar Jackson, who they want to have, so they don't. If an injury occurs, you can just sub the guy in, and you're not getting Lamar Jackson. You're getting like
Daniel Jones, Tyrod Taylor.
Daniel Jones, exactly. Yeah, there's tons of examples. Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, I think that's kind of where the question originated from, was like thinking about football and stuff. So yeah, yeah.
No, it's great. Like I said, I think it's, again, hockey's been pretty guilty of this for a long time, which is like you just take the best available player, right? That's the philosophy. That's the philosophy in the draft, because you're projecting on players for years out. Doesn't matter what position you need, right? Even your second, third overall pick might not sign in the NHL. Now, this past year was a talent anomaly, but most years, right? Like you're still getting guys going back to junior. So hockey's always been a best person up sport, right? I think we are starting to shift that now. And maybe this will tie into another question, Jeff. I think modeling goaltending is really hard. And I think that is like the next big thing that can still be developed in hockey or further developed. But I think that also ties into it as well, where we're just like, I always say that goaltending evaluation is like a heuristic driven process. It's like, right, that goalie gets it. They can make a big save, right? And I encourage everyone, there's some really good draft guides out there. There's some really not as good draft guides out there, but go read some goalie scouting reports. I remember reading one that said, this goalie knows how to make a big save. And I sat there going, I hope so. It's like, and again, everyone, again, now with the kind of the analytics era, everyone likes to pull it back to Moneyball, right? But it's like the scene where they're sitting around and has a great swing. We still do that about goalies because we don't have better evaluation methods.
Like your girlfriend shows more confidence.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, let's just unpack this then, because I think I know what you're alluding here to, like the predictive metrics and stuff. So, what have you found from your research into the draft and to goaltender statistics? Have you found anything that's available publicly that can be either modeled out publicly or something along those lines, where like you find a statistic that is predictive of future success, right? Because honestly, all we use right now is save percentage, goals against average. That's like the general public. If you want to get like a little sharper, you do expected goals saved above average or expected goals saved above expected. But I don't think either of those are good predictive as good of predictive measures for individual goalie talent. It's more so for player talent, right? So what, like I've seen Money Puck talk about puck freezes over expected. I don't think that's a thing either. Like, so it's so hard to find good predictive metrics. So like, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what you found and what you're trying to do to try and like remedy this problem we have with public statistics and goaltenders?
Right. So I think, like, first and foremost, I think anyone who's doing work in the public space, I think a lot of the work people do, whether I think it's accurate or whether I think it's actually what they're saying, I'm always so impressed by it. Like the amount of time and energy that goes into all the people who do that prospect modeling. So shout out to all the modelers out there and all the stats people.
Yes. Way above my head. That's why. I can't even begin to imagine what it takes. I've tried. It's impossible.
Yeah. Right. So I think the biggest hang up, and this is something again that I've been kind of talking and toying around about, is I think when we look at, again, evaluation metrics, I think you can only model with the data that you have. And I think the data that we have with goaltending isn't good enough. Like, I think that's really just cut and dry. I think the things that we are measuring a lot of the time is not satisfactory for long-term stability, right? So if you look at things like save percentage, you look at things like, again, goals saved above expected, there isn't this stable line, right? Which is what leads to everyone being like, oh, goaltending is voodoo, right? Because there's no consistency with it. Well, I think that always begs the question of, is it the goaltending isn't a consistent thing, or is it the measures that we're using to evaluate goaltending don't accurately hold up over time? There's too much interseason variance. There's too many weird shifts that go on. There's unaccounted stuff for. So I think a lot of the time that sort of work and predicting of who's going to be great the next year is too broadly influenced by other factors right now, and we haven't been able to isolate things. Like, I still think public models and expected goals is one of the best things that we have. But again, everyone should be aware of, in public models, we don't have pre-shot movement, which is one of the big ones, right? That's, I think, the number one thing, especially in goalie land, right? So, like, I'm not sure, from like a goal scoring perspective, from a player evaluation perspective, the ability to put the puck in the net on a more consistent basis than not is good, right? But I think when we back that out and look at it at the goalie lens, I think we don't have it the right way. I remember having a conversation with someone who does really, really great work. And at no point have they considered or wanted to know where the goalie was relative to the puck on a chance, because their view is that a shot scoring chance is not influenced by the goalie. It's rather influenced by the entire play around them. And I could not disagree more, right? Like, I know that from a coaching perspective and from a playing perspective, right? Like, there's definitely chances where a goalie gets into the right spot, reads that play early, beats the puck, they're there in time, player doesn't shoot, player puts the puck in their chest, right? All those sorts of things that we don't have to quantify right now. And I think, honestly, the ability to try and get better statistics and better methods of measuring goalies is expensive, time consuming, and teams are just like, right? Like, I think it's just hard to do. Like, something that I think is really, really interesting. And if people are, people listen to this, go back and watch any junior goalies or any of the goalies Leafs have drafted in the past and want to see what looks back. The thing I would ask you to look at is look at how many times a puck beats them on a clean shot. And that could be whether it goes in, whether it misses the net, whether it hits the post, whatever that looks like. But I think you actually start to see a lot from how many clean shot beats goalies give up. And that's one of the big indicators of something that is consistent over time, because a clean one-on-one shot is an isolated situation between a shooter and a goaltender. Very rarely in other game situations do you get that. It's one of the only isolated chances for goalies, right? So I think if you want to look at something that's consistent, is what's that clean shot ratio? So a little bit of that's my thing I'd love to see measured if we could look forward and look at prospecting. But I think our current statistics right now don't really give us a lot to kind of go off of, especially from like a prospect pipeline. At the NHL level, good luck. Like, you're going to see who can do well on an individual season benefit, like a placement. But from year to year, you just kind of look at seeing the guys who've been able to perform, and there are a few of them, but it's few and far between. So,
it's like look at Jake Markstrom. Jason and I were talking about him last episode because Jason had him as a bounce back candidate, and he went from 904 to Vezina 930 or whatever, back down to an 892 last year. It's just like, how do you really predict that part? But I will say this, and like further to your point, I was listening to, I think it was PDO Cast with Kevin Woodley, and he had all the ClearSight analytics, which is a private model. He had them all in front of him, and Dmitry Filipovich was asking, like, who do you think, because Buffalo, it looks like should, or maybe they'll trade for a goalie, maybe they'll sign one, who knows? And it's like, who do you think would fit in Buffalo's system? And he looked at it and he said, well, like, you could go out and get Connor Hellebuyck. He's not going to be a Vezina candidate there. Look where Connor Hellebuck's weakness is. Look at what the Sabres give up the most of. And it was not a good fit there. And then he even went Jeremy Swayman, same thing. It's like, so back to Jason's point earlier, the defensive structure in front of the goalie, does it favor to that goalie's strengths? Yes or no? That's a huge part of it. And I think you even look back at Detroit went and got Nedeljkovic. That system fit horrible with him, horrible. And then he's out of Carolina 2 years later, or Detroit 2 years later.
Yeah, no, that, and again, being in Carolina's system, and like the Carolina organization is like, again, just an absolute powerhouse of the whole organization top down. But again, they play a really favorable system. That's why you have, two goalies in their mid to late 30s in Freddie Anderson and Antti Raanta, who are excellent there because they play a really solid. And again, you want to look at two goalies who play a similar style, like you have them. And then honestly, make it number 3. Kochekov's not far off. That might actually be the answer to the 3 most consistent goalies in a fit. Those are pretty similar goalies across the 3 of them. The one thing I was also going to say is with Markstrom too, right? Is, he also took a huge jump in games played that season and he also had a really, again, pretty easy year, that 922 year a few years ago. I think he had like one of the easiest seasons of like all time from the past like 6 years in terms of danger chances. So yeah, great year, but just like a light load. And that, again, goalie's a reactive position, right? I will never criticize a goalie for a team giving up 22 shots. You don't give, right? Like that's not your problem.
Yeah.
Right. But I think, that's it's definitely going to be an interesting thing. I think Markstrom has a lot of bounce back potential. I think there's a big shift happening in Calgary, and he's got the potential to do it. I've been a big fan of his, again, since back in, I'm going to date myself now, but back all the way when he was in Florida, right? Which is 2011. So, yeah.
All right, good. I was a little worried you were going to say that my bounce back candidate pick was a bad pick. I was going to say, hey, you're on our podcast. No, I'm kidding. So with respect to what you do over at university as a student, you mentioned that you do a lot of research with draft trends and what NHL teams are trying to do, getting into the mind of an organization and how they draft and what they're looking for. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about that? Because like just from the preliminary talks before we hopped on here and hit the record button, I was super excited to learn more about it. So I'm not even going to ask you like a specific question. Just the floor is yours. Tell us about what you're doing here.
So I'll keep it really simple because I think the results that we've seen are really simple. Teams like to draft tall goalies who play a lot of games. And we're done. All right, moving on. So again, goaltending evaluation is really tricky, right? Like you look at a team's scouting department, they don't have a half dozen goalie scouts that are deciding who they're going to pick, right? Teams might have between 3 and 11 picks in a season, whatever that number looks like, and they might, with 11 picks, not take a goalie, right? There's just such less of an emphasis on it. Mm-hmm. And so teams do a couple things, which is they take, again, very rarely do teams go off board for goalies, right? Like we saw this year's first round for players and there's a little bit of movement. Guys fell a bunch off board, right? Like a lot of movement that way. Very, very, very rarely do we see off board goalie movement, right? Because there's just such a smaller pool. Go back to your sample size thing. I'm happy to bang that drum for you guys too. But when it comes to what teams are looking for, there is, again, a couple things, right? If you're not tall, you're not going to get drafted, which that's just the trend we've seen in the last 12 years. There are exceptions, and I think there should be more exceptions to it. I think teams get really, really fascinated with the idea of projecting onto goalies. But I think when you're drafting an 18 or 19-year-old, I think you need to be aware that like that game's not going to change very much. So if you're drafting off raw tools for a goalie, we just talked about this, like how quickly are they going to get into like a highly controlled professional setting where they can then develop that stuff? Or are you just, letting them play wherever they want? And we talk about that a lot in our podcast at Goalie Science. That's my biggest end rant there is that, if you're just going to draft a goalie to put them in Idaho in the ECHL at 20, I don't know if that's the best move for your prospect, right? And so you have to be aware for that as an organization. Outside of that, there's a really fun, what we call this is in other draft research, is like a FOMO trend, right? Where a team will find a goalie out of the middle of nowhere league that no one's ever heard of. And then teams are like, well, we should go look there. That guy rocks, right? Like the classic story, and I get yelled at a lot because I always tell this one, but Sergei Bobrovsky is undrafted, largely because he played in like the third Russian junior league, his NHL draft year. And was like, I think he played in like Novonorsk. So it was like, or Novos, I'm butchering that, but like played in a place that was one, hard to get to, two, this was like the late 2000s, and three, right? Like it was, no one's going there to watch him. There's been a couple goalies drafted out of the Russian third league since. And for the same reason that they think goalies might be hiding in places. And they're like, well, we saw this guy play a couple times and he's great. And we're not going to use this 6th or 7th round pick anyways. Let's go grab that guy. So you do see FOMO trends where if you looked at even this past year, lots and lots of European guys in the late 5th, 6th, 7th round, right? Because they're like, well, we saw them and we don't know much about that, but at least, those leagues produce someone. So the other one to go back to look at that's been really interesting to look at is when Connor Hellebuck was drafted, he was drafted out of the NAHL, so the North American Hockey League, which is it's like the second highest junior A league in the U.S. The story always goes that the scout who saw him was there to watch the other goalie and saw him in that game, and that's the story of how he was first, put on the radar. It was an accident. Which I always find that's a classic goalie story. Pekka Rinne was scouted out of a backup of a warm-up in a game. That's Pekka Rinne's draft story, right? Yeah. So but again, go back to like, what are we drafting goalies off of? This is what we're drafting goalies off of, right? So yeah, like very in-depth scientific evaluation is what we're drafting goalies off of. But go back to Connor Hellebuck, right? So he gets drafted out of the North American Hockey League, and then pretty much ever since, you'll catch a bunch of goalies drafted out of the league. And it's a pretty good league, don't get me wrong. But the USHL is objectively a better league, and it's right there. And we're not seeing nearly as many goalies drafted out of that league as we've seen out of the NAHL, which is funny to me. But again, it's like, okay, maybe it's that diamond in the rough. Maybe we didn't see that guy enough, all those kind of thoughts creep in. And that's where we get those decision makings going. So if you're wondering next year who the Toronto Maple Leafs will take, if it's a goalie, he's probably tall, probably played a lot of games in whatever league he played in. And that is often the deciding factor. So
if you haven't heard already, it's smooth sack summer. When you're playing in the summer sun, make sure you're scaped from pubes to bum. That's right. This is the summer to keep your balls cool while still looking hot with Manscaped. The leaders in below the waist grooming are making sure we all have a ball this summer by giving our pants partners everything they need to stay fresh. Dive headfirst into smooth sack summer by going to manscaped.com for 20% off and free shipping with our code RINKRAT. That is RINKRAT. Get 20% off and free shipping with code RINKRAT at manscaped.com. That's 20% off and free shipping with the code RINKRAT at manscaped.com. We've talked about them. The underwear are fantastic. That's probably my favorite product from them, but the razors are stupendous as well. Again, promo code RINKRAT, RINKRAT at manscaped.com. Take a look in your underwear. If there's a rip, throw those things out, you disgusting piece of garbage, and go to manscaped.com, 20% off and free shipping.
That's so interesting.
The last three that they've taken, I think, were Hildeby, who's 6'6", Hexa, and then Artur Akhtamov, who
correct.
Akhtamov, I believe, played for the same team or something like that. But going back to what you said about Bobrovsky, Metalurg Novokuznetsk, Russian third division in his draft year. Oh, sorry, Metalurg Novokuznetsk, 2.
Yeah, and that's a
Russian
great example. Yeah, right. Yeah, sorry. Novonorsk is a big European funding agency. They can pass the money our way. I'm sure they got money. No, but yeah, again, stories like that. Those are things that are, again, these are the classic goalie stories, and I love it. I heard someone else mention that goaltending sometimes is a bit of survivorship bias, like who can wait it out long enough to get a chance.
Yeah,
and that's a big part of it too, right? Like that's what happened with Logan Thompson this year in Vegas, right? So
yeah. What a story that is. Friend of the show, not actually, but I just like to say friend of the show because I like Logan Thomas a lot. So one more question with regards to this.
Actually, one similarity. Sorry to cut you off, Jason. One similarity. Myself, Ben, Logan Thompson, all USports one and dones, I believe.
Happy to be here. I think I played a total of like 3 regular season games in my 1 year of USport hockey. So pretty big showing, I'd say.
So that basically means you have a 1 in 3 chance to make the NHL if you play USports.
Yeah, exactly. There we go.
Yeah. I got 2 games my year, and it was because everyone else got injured. Like everyone in front of me got injured.
And that's the way it goes, right?
Just one more thing with regards to drafting goaltending and like the trends you're seeing here. I know this isn't kind of where your work lies, and I guess this kind of ties into the question we talked about a little bit before with statistics. Like, where do you see, like, what needs to be done to kind of improve the process here? Is it just simply like building out a bigger goalie scouting department? Is it investing more money and time into stats? Like, if you had, let's say you had unlimited money right now, how would you build out like a scouting department for researching goaltending and stuff like that? Yeah,
so I think the way that you kind of have to look at it is start by like, again, what are the like the theory behind like what we think is what makes you a goalie, right? And one of the more challenging parts is we look at kind of like the top goalies in the NHL, and they're not very similar playing style wise, right? And that's where the hang-up starts, is we look at these goalies and our first view at them is they don't look like they do the same things well. And that's where we're just wrong. They do the same things well. They just look different doing it. Right? Like a really good example for all our top guys. So I think of the top guys as pretty much, I think most people think of the same ones now, right? So it's the Sorokin, it's the Shesterkin, it's the Saros, it's the Hellebuck, it's the Vasilevsky, Ottinger's creeping into that, right? That's those kind of, and I guess it's I'd be remiss not to say Linus Ullmark had a pretty good year last year too.
Yeah.
Right. Like those are kind of the big names we think of. And if you look at what their shared characteristics are, that's the first place you want to start. Right. Let's identify the skills that are across the board leading people. Okay. So once we do that, once we actually break that down, that's step one. Can we then look at if they had those same characteristics when they were drafted? Right. Because if they did, okay, now we know that there might be a relationship between when we see them as 17, 18-year-olds and then what they're doing in the professional span. And if they don't, we need to know why. We need to know, are people getting better, or are we just, again, or is that just a happenstance, one-offs, right? This is the biggest challenge of this work, is that there's a small sample size of goalies to work with, right? So step one's identifying those skills. Do they exist in the NHL? What are the shared characteristics? I guarantee you watch all those guys, they are rarely out of position on first or second shots. Rarely, right? Think of the best ones. Saros looks a lot different on a scrambly or broken play than Hellebuyck does, but they get to the same spots. Different ways, but they get to the same spots, right? So can they do that at the beginning? Do they do that in the NHL? From there, you have to then pull out, okay, what are the other things that we can actually measure, and how do we measure that from there? Right. So again, I talked a little bit about clear shots. I think that's one of the more interesting things, is how well do those goalies do on clear shots, right? And I think as fans, nothing feels more frustrating than the wrist shot from the top of the circle that goes in, right? Yeah. But it happens all the time. Like the Leafs scored 50 of those last year, right? Guy steps in, Matthews steps in, Marner steps in, shot from just inside the top of the circle, goal, right? So it's frustrating to watch, but we love it when we score it. I think it's becoming a more popular goal, and I think that's a pretty good barometer for just, again, a simple goalie test. But I would look at, again, how often is your goalie just making sure they're in the right spot? Like you see a ton of goals at every level where player comes in, takes a shot, and the goalie's kind of in the wrong spot. It's a great shot, but in goaltending, we're like, he's off his angle. He's not in between the middle of the net and the puck. That happens every night in the NHL. Yeah. But we need to be aware of like how regularly it's happening, when we evaluate players, right? So scouting department should look at that. They should look at, I always say a few things. So a clean shot ratio, how often is a goalie being in the clean shot? Off angle ratio, what's the shots to non-shots where they're in the right spot before the shot came in, right? Those are the places I would start. But again, as you can imagine, when a team has 80 shot attempts a game, you're marking that down or trying to track that on a camera angle 80 times. It's a person power issue, right? So if I could build that out, those are things I'd start with. I would start with, again, find those characteristics. And then I think there are simple ways to measure it. We just got to do it. So anyone wants to, find 40 people and 40 inset accounts and try to change the camera angle until we can get the right one, we're cooking. We can do it. We can all be rich.
One day. That's a great way to put it. Cause it's the biggest thing is manpower. But like you said, though, like, I think eventually we will get to a spot where teams will be like, all right, we're not able to get enough of an edge on forwards and defensemen drafting and developing through there. The edge has to come through goalies eventually. I don't know when, I don't know how, but at some point, hockey always lags behind, but at some point it'll get there. So before we get into, we want to kind of talk a bit about our sponsors over at DraftKings and take a look at some odds. But before we get into that, let's quickly go through some bounce back guys you have for goalies this year and some buy low guys. So to separate the two, I'm going to ask you the same question, the two questions at the same time though. So bounce back guy is a guy who was once good, kind of like Markstrom, who had a bad year last year, who could bounce back. And buy low guys is simply a guy who hasn't shown it yet, but has a potential to kind of go nuclear or perform much better than expected. I
like this. This is a good question. I'm pulling up numbers because I don't want to. I pulled it up. We're good. I don't want to be speaking off the cuff here.
All good. I can buy you time if you need. I'm a good filibuster.
No, I'm good. Okay, so what do you want to start with? Bounce back or buy low?
Let's do bounce back. Why not? Yeah.
Okay, bounce back. I think that we are going to see. I think Jacob Markstrom's a really safe pick. I think we're going to see a lot more from him. I think last year was a really big down year. I think that there's just no chance that stays. It's just variance, right? At the end of the day, there's so many. I watched I went through about 15 of his games, just going through kind of the goals he was letting in, and at some point, it just felt like he just couldn't catch a break all year, right? Like I think I watched a handful of goals, like off a player, the puck comes back, he's in the wrong spot, just tough stuff. And at the end of the day, that's hockey. It's why we watch the game. It's why it's incredibly frustrating sometimes, right? So that's one of the big ones. Another one that I want to say that, again, bounce back is kind of a stretch because, again, he dealt with some injury stuff. But I think Thatcher Demko is someone who has had a lot of potential. He had that great season a few years back and has kind of been like just dealing with stuff on and off since then. And I think Vancouver's gone through a whole bunch of shifts and changes, and they have a pretty good young core now to the point that I think he's, again, a really high caliber goalie. So I think that's someone that we should keep an eye out. And my really, really big sleeper pick, and this is someone that's close to my heart, I really hope Elvis Merzlikins out in Columbus has that bounce back season. He really had a tough go to start the year last year. And I think anyone who kind of followed what happened to him and the Columbus organization the season before, like, shouldn't be too surprised about that kind of situation. I'm hoping, again, that he comes back ready to go, because that's a fun goalie to watch. Dynamic, super good skater, not always positionally the best, but like a really fun goalie to watch. And as much as I love really, really good goalie, I like to watch fun goaltending too. So those are going to be my three. Again, because he was going to be the starter in Columbus last year, right? He went in being the starter. And if we're looking at starters that way, I think he could have a big bounce back here. Yeah, awful, really bad. But coming back.
Yeah,
fair enough.
He's got the tools though. Sorry to cut you off, but with Elvis Merzlikins, I found that like he has the tools to be a really good goaltender, and it's similar to. No, I'm not even going to say his name. No, he's not a very good goaltender. Elvis Merzlikins, like he's big, he skates pretty well, but I just find that this guy never stays square to the puck. It's sort of a similar issue to Jacob Markstrom. Like I remember once I randomly had on. It was the Blue Jackets and Kraken, and on a play, he was like flipped the wrong way as the puck was coming. What? But it's such a small detail, and you think, okay, just fucking stand there and stop the puck, dude. Like, but
yeah.
like, it a lot more difficult in practice. But would you be surprised if next year he just comes in and changes that part, figures out something, and all of a sudden he's good? He's got better defensemen in front of him now too, Damon Severson. Yeah. Ivan Provorov. So it's a good pick.
And so, I mean, like, I think they should be a little bit better defensively in Columbus than last year. And again, that's a part of it. He was not good, and I don't think anyone would say he was. But I think there is, like you said, there's a really good tools there. And again, dynamic goalies are fun to watch, right? Like anyone, again, like a good comp for him is like Karl Vejmelka, who just had a great year in Arizona. They play very similarly, like very dynamic, not always as positionally controlled as some of the other people we talked about already. But they're fun. And again, hockey's supposed to be fun, right? We're actually supposed to enjoy watching it once in a while, not just like only focus on the result. And those goalies are fun. A lot of big sprawly saves because they're aggressive goalies who are, like, again, great skaters. So they allow for those big chances to happen. Whether that's good or not, I don't know, but it's fun.
Exactly. I'm literally kicking myself because you mentioned I don't know how I couldn't think of Thatcher Demko as a bounce back candidate. That is, like, with what happened with Vancouver last year, like, come on. We did a bounce back draft last episode, and I'm just annoyed I didn't pick him. But anyways, now on to the next one. So we did bounce backs. Who are your buy low guys?
Can I buy Joseph Woll low?
Yes.
Is it?
You can buy, yes.
He's my number one buy low. He is.
I love that. Fantasy fiends out there, this is your guy to get.
Yeah, I think he should get a pretty favorable schedule. Again, from a fantasy perspective, from a daily fantasy perspective, like, I think he's going to get a favorable 25, 28 shot type game load this year. Barring he doesn't jump over Samsonov. But I think that is going to be probably the number one pick that I think in terms of you're going to get a lot of value to that. Some people that I think are more long-term stuff, like I actually really like Sam Montembeault's game in Montreal. Montreal, again, not a good team last year. I'm actually a pretty big Sam Montembeault fan. I really like the way he plays. Underappreciated. Like, again, the Canadians had sneaky, really good goaltending last year. They were a really not good team in the season. But Jake Allen is no slouch whatsoever. He's been a good goalie for a long time. Sam Montembeault was really good last year. Yeah. And again, I think if that's my really big sleeper buy low, because again, it's going to be dependent on Montreal and how they are as a team. Goaltending, you're at the mercy of your team. I don't care how great you are, right? How great was UC Saros? Did Nashville make the playoffs? Right? It didn't matter. At the end of the day, like, he was, again, and probably Vezina robbed in a lot of ways. Like, he was so good. But Nashville was not, and you can only get yourself so far. So that's my number two. And if I can toss a third one out there, and this is someone that everyone's going to watch this year, no matter what. but I would love to see Devin Levi get 45 games this year. I would love nothing more than to Buffalo to just play Devin Levi and let them be the team that experiments with actually letting a young goalie play, right? The only other time we've seen the team really let a goalie run, and even then it's not really true, was Carter Hart in Philly when he came in as a 21-year-old, right? There was a lot of pressure put on Carter Hart as like the face of Canadian goaltending when he came into Philadelphia as a 21-year-old. It's a lot to put on a 21-year-old, right? It just is. And he was still pretty decent his first 2 years. He's been a consistent goalie. He had one off year where the team was decided to not play on the penalty kill anymore. I don't really know how that happened, but they just like decided to just give up 1 million power play goals. But that's like the last time or only recent time we've really seen a young guy just kind of run away with it. I'd love to see Devin Levi get 45, 50 games this year. I'd love him to be the starter in Buffalo. Whether that's going to happen, I don't know, but I'd love to see it.
I still have some faith in Eric Comrie, so maybe he holds it still. But yeah, Devin Levi, again, like a fantastic prospect.
Yeah. I mean, Comrie had one of the most outlandish workloads in terms of like scoring chances against last year. And I think like across, whether it's public models, whether it's private models, whether it's you just watching the game on a Thursday night and watching him have to make ridiculously backdoor after backdoor save, like that guy got absolutely peppered last year, and there's no way around it. Buffalo is a really fun team to watch out of their own zone, right? Like really fun team to watch out of their own zone. And they're poor goaltenders last year.
A fun team to watch in both ends of the zone. You just have to not be a fan of them, like as long as if you for like a casual game that you're not a fan of either team, you throw on a Buffalo game and you're going to see like cocaine riding a motorcycle out, a helicopter shooting a guns akimbo. Yeah, so with those
your Demko pick there, sorry. Last 17 games played of this past season, 11-4-2 with a .918 save percentage.
Thatcher Demko is awesome. That's a California goaltending prospect. That's also another fun trivia fact. Go back and look at some of the California-based goalies. There have been a couple. But it's pretty hard to argue when you have, and this is a good litmus test for anyone who is interested in this one too, and like where do you get good goalies from? If you have a true freshman 18-year-old goalie starting at Boston College, they're probably good at hockey. And so there's been a few of those over the past years, but again, it's pretty important to look at, right? So,
all right. So speaking of Demko, I feel like this might be a guy we're going to talk about in a bit, maybe not, depends. But let's close it out with the Vezina conversation. We're going to be sourcing our odds from DraftKings, of course. As you know, use promo code THPN if you haven't signed up for a DraftKings account. Helps it support the show. And before we get into this, obviously, guys, make sure you're risking whatever you're willing to lose. Be very smart. Be safe with gambling. Gamble responsibly, as always. So if you have any questions about gambling and gambling responsibly, please, DMs are always open. So with that out of the way, just looking at the Vezina Trophy, I guess, board here for DraftKings. There's a clear top six. You got Sorokin at 4-1, Shesterkin 6-1, Saros 6-1, Hellebuck 7-1, Vasilevsky 8-1, Ottinger 12-1. Are the guys you're targeting here going to be in that cluster? Because if we look at the award in years past, it's going to be guys who are kind of alphas in their goal in the dressing room. Guys who are probably going to get like a ton of games. The only outliers was Marc-Andre Fleury. Was it 2 years ago? And I think that was a shortened season. Yeah. Maybe not. So are those the guys you're looking at? And if so, like, who do you like of that kind of cluster?
Yeah. So I think the tricky thing there is actually taking yourself away from who you think the best goalie and the most deserving goalie is, right? Because don't think that. Do not bet, right? That is not the case a lot of the time. Like we saw with Linus Ullmark, it is the goalie who has the best run on a good team. And that's typically where voters fall to, right? Like at the end of the day, and this is not true about all media, but with goaltending, people still love wins and save percentage, right? They love that.
Yes.
And that's fine. Like, again, I'm actually a bit of a save percentage truther. I think at the top end, it doesn't tell us much. I think it tells us a lot at the low end. I think it identifies that something has gone wrong. But at the end of the day, like there's still a good enough reason to look at that enough. It paints a bit of a picture. Out of all of those, I think we can learn something from last year, which is that you can have an incredible season like UC Saros, but your team doesn't make the playoffs and you don't get a sniff, right? So right off the bat, I'm not sure Nashville really got a lot better this offseason. I think UC Saros is great. I also think UC Saros, I wouldn't be surprised to see him maybe on the trading block at some point this season if Nashville becomes sellers again at the deadline. So that's something to be, if you're really interested in again, 6-1 is, it's on the worst ends or the more favored ends overall. But I wouldn't be surprised if that movement and then him going to a great team would put him above the edge on that one, right? That's a storyline that I think people in media can really get behind, right? That, this great goalie who goes out of there and it makes a big thing. Now, I did also hear at one point that Nashville was rumored to be trying to trade Askarov or putting Askarov on their trading block, which feels wild to me. Look, Nashville has been like the best goaltending drafting team in the last 2 decades. Like this has been between Pekarinen, Saros, and Askarov. Like this has been efficient drafting in terms of like they got a lot of years out of Pekarinen, right? They also got a lot of years out of Thomas Vokoun. If we want to go back,
that's right.
Good Puck Duco stash, by the way. Good Puck Duco stash.
Yeah, Florida.
His Puck Duco, like his whole thing. First team is actually Montreal.
Really? I forgot. You know what? Yeah, and then he ends up in.
He played.
Wow.
And Nashville, Florida, Pittsburgh. Sorry to throw everything off.
No, that's great. I had a terrible puck Doku today. I'm awful. Yeah. I can only remember I remember goalies who play for like 3 teams, and that's what all I got. Yeah, I'm useless. But that's that. So, but I think the best play is if there's something I like a good storyline, and I think if we learn anything from last year with Linus Ullmark, I think there's a lot of potential for good storylines, right? So I got Philip Gustafsson at 20-1. I think that has the potential to be an incredible storyline, right? Minnesota, good defensive team. Gustafsson was unreal for them last year. Minnesota makes a big run. He comes back just as strong. I don't see any argument for them not to have that as a big deal, right? But it's a bit of a higher risk play. We talked about it before. He was not quite maybe the same goalie in Ottawa behind a very different team. Now, still in Minnesota, so maybe a kind of potential there. Thatcher Demko at 30-1. If you want to do some long odds there, again, that is, and we talk about stories, right? It's good goaltending on a good goaltending on at least a good enough team with a good story. That's what people care about. Thatcher Demko would be an awesome story if he comes back to that play he had from a past couple of years, right? And even at the end of last year, right? That's a story again. And we got to be honest with it, right? Canadian market, people love a Canadian market. Vancouver's been bad. He brings that team back. That's a story you can get behind, right?
Agreed.
So again, the best odds, right? Or Sorokin, the Saros, Sorokin, those are the obvious ones. Those are the best standalone goalies in the league. But you got to look at it from does that sell the story that we're trying to sell?
Exactly. And at the end of the day, chances are two of those 6 goalies are going to be finalists for the award. Like realistically, if I was able to bet that, I would bet that, right? But we're looking for that one goalie that's going to be along with them and have that chance at the dance to like close in on these higher odds. So you mentioned Demko 31, Gustafsson 21. There's a couple other ones that I'm looking at this board, and some guys we talked about today, like Samsonov 75-1. That is like, I mean, I'm a big, like, there's a slight anti-Toronto bias in awards voting. And like, maybe people think I'm wrong in that, but like, again, I'm from Toronto, so I'm going to say that. But I really think so. Cause some guys left Austin, like, I don't know, some guy left Connor McDavid off his ballot last year, but there were people who didn't vote McDavid for MVP Matthews for MVP. Like there's just seems like he has to do a lot, but I think Samsonov at 75-1. And then there's another one that like Canadian market seem kind of idea, like thought train, I guess, as you were talking about with Demko, but maybe a little bit more psycho and crazy because I'm a little psycho and crazy. But Jack Campbell 100-1 or Stuart Skinner 100-1. I mean, listen, Edmonton's probably going to make the playoffs. If one of them can just pull out and become the starter and be a good goalie, like, am I like a monkey lighting money on fire if I bet on these, or like, what are your thoughts on Samsonov and then the Edmonton tandem?
Again, like Samsonov, this is gonna be interesting to see. I could see Samsonov pull up a 930 save percentage this year. Yeah. Right? Like the Leafs are a good hockey team. And again, if that system continues, he was, again, this last year was season 1 for Samsonov, right? I spend a lot of today talking about how important the environment is around goalies, right? It takes time for teams to work systems and again, to integrate how they play around their goalies. That's why teams hesitate to trade goalies at the deadline, right? It takes too much time. I could see Samsonov coming in and having a great year. Last year was his best year on like those basic statistics, and I thought he did a lot of stuff well, right? I do, however, think you should probably not bet on an Edmonton goalie. Only because, and again, like I said, I like to look at it from the story perspective when we think about, you know, the best goalies and the best story that ties it all together. Stuart Skinner had a really great year for a long time last year. Comes in, takes that starting role. Campbell obviously struggled and wasn't the best that he could be. And like, again, there's a bit of an anti-goalie bias in that rookie of the year vote, but like that probably, like, Stuart Skinner was a starting goalie on the Edmonton Oilers, like, and was good for them for a long time. And there was like a lot of disagreement that he should even be mentioned, which felt silly to me.
Yeah. It's like the Michael Bunting thing all over again.
Look, so he's 24, all right? Is he really a rookie? Yeah, right. Like I get it. But again, we want to talk about not giving goalies a chance, right? That's the reality. A rookie goalie is 24, right? It's not the 19-year-old anymore, right? And people are upset when Kirill Kaprizov came over too, but like, so he played 5 years in the KHL, whatever, it's fine. It doesn't count. Right. So I like those. I think, again, if you're a Toronto fan and that's something for a little bit of fun, yeah, Samsonov, again, is again, be aware. We talked about, you said it yourself, Dave, right? Like, it's going to be, he's probably not going to play 60, 65 games. That might be a knock against him, if you want to look at it from that perspective. But in terms of like what he's going to bring in the value that he's going to be to the Leafs, again, I think he's going to be really important. I think he's going to, if the team plays around him and plays in that system that favors him and lets him really shine his game, yeah, like I don't see why he couldn't have another really good year to follow up last year's good year season.
Yeah, I love that. Awesome. I like all the input. Thank you again for this little humoring us with the DraftKings stuff and helping out our sponsors here. Hopefully they like it. And guys, remember, as always, please bet responsibly. Trying to preach that. If you have any questions with how to bet responsibly, hit up my DMs. So
that was all I had from my end. Jason, you're good as well.
I am great. I am great as well. Hopefully we can have Ben back on. I love doing the show today.
This was awesome. Again, thanks, Ben, so much for coming on. I think everyone learned a ton from this episode.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys. Thanks so much. I will always take advantage to preach about anything goaltending related. And again, I think it's, like I said, I think it's, there's a lot that gets said and there's a lot that gets put out in the media, but I think, there's a lot to put under the microscope and a lot of finer details that we can kind of to look at that are a little more than just the superficial stuff that we see on intermission commentary, right? So
exactly.
Awesome.
Anyways, thanks everyone for listening.
Goalies go.